Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is control. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear control used is to mean to determine the behavior or supervise the running of something. Sometimes this verb gets used in connection to managers or supervisors who are telling their employees how to act or how to operate or run something. A second way the verb control gets used is to mean to maintain influence or authority over someone or something. With this second definition, my mind immediately goes to parents and children. Parents try to maintain influence and authority over their children. Some days are more successful than others. But generally, right, they're guiding kind of their behavior, their actions, what they're allowed or not allowed to do. A third way control gets used is to mean to limit the level, the intensity, or the numbers of something. So maybe you've attended a festival or some other event where only so many people were allowed to enter at a particular time. We could use this verb to describe that action of limiting the number of people who can enter. A fourth way the verb control gets used is to mean to regulate some type of mechanical or scientific process. With this, you might think of how we lower or raise the volume on our computers, on our TVs, phones, etc., right? We're regulating the volume or we're controlling it. Okay? You should know that control is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, we're going to have a spelling change. Now, with my students, many times we talk about when to double an ending consonant, and we really focus a lot on one syllable verbs that have one consonant. Now, sometimes once we get to two or more syllables, we're going to double that final consonant when the stress is on that second syllable or the ending syllable. So here the word control, troll is getting our stress. And so you're going to see a second L before I add ing. That forms controlling. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made in a similar way. We're going to double the ending L, and then I'm going to add ed to form controlled. Now, my base verb ended with an L sound. That's a voice sound. So you might have noticed as I said that, I just made a D sound. I did not add an extra syllable to the word. So it should sound like this: controlled, controlled. Okay. Now, I'm going to pause 1 second. I know later in the videos, or usually when I talk about related words, but I had some other things that I thought you might hear and could be good to note. I do want to note that controlling and controlled can also be used as adjectives. And many times with the ing form there, that controlling, that has a really strong negative meaning to it. So sometimes you hear about people's partners, their significant others, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, being controlling. Right? And it's that idea of they're maintaining authority. They're telling what the other person can do, or whom they can spend time with, or in many different ways. And many people think that is not really healthy when we're talking about adults, right? Each adult should be able to decide what he or she does. With that note, now that we have a little understanding and that it has more of a strong negative meaning when it's used as an adjective, I will note that as a verb, not always strongly positive or negative, could just depend on the situation and what we're trying, what type of action we're trying to describe. Now, you'll be happy to know no additional phrasal verbs for us to study today, so instead, we can focus on making some sentences in different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the past progressive and the present perfect progressive. Let's start with the past progressive. Many teachers and many books will call this the past continuous, and that's perfectly fine. It means exactly the same thing. We use the past progressive to talk about an action that was ongoing or an action that was continuing during a certain point or a certain period of time in the past. It's pretty common to see past progressive sentences where we see the past progressive verb, see that it's continuing, and then see it be interrupted by a simple past tense verb. I don't think we're going to see examples of that today, but I always like to point that out. Now, the reason I like calling this past progressive is the two-letter P's, the first P in past, the second P in progressive, is going to help me remember I need two parts to my verb. So the first part of my verb is going to be the past tense form of be. So that's going to be was, if my subject is I, he, she, or it, or it will be were, W-E-R-E, if my subject is you, we, or they. Okay, so past form of be, and then the second part of my verb, the progressive form, is that ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at an affirmative example. We're going to say subject, past form of be, ing form of the verb. Here's that example. The magician was controlling the audience members' behavior during the show. Okay? So this sentence might be describing someone who's been hypnotized, right? And again, this is sometimes done as a form of entertainment, right? Telling someone to maybe bark like a dog if they hear a certain word or do something a bit silly. But again, they're having that influence over a particular person's behavior. Now let's talk about negative past progressive sentences. To do this, start with my subject. I use was not or wasn't, or I use were not or weren't, and then I use the ing form of the verb. So that inclusion of not is what makes it negative. Here's another example sentence. He wasn't controlling his temper during the meeting. Okay? So this could go back to that example of intensity. Right? So here, this is a sentence that's really talking about someone's anger, right? And this happens to us all, where certain things kind of make us feel a little frustrated, a little angry. But many times, right, we need to take a deep breath and not yell, not pound on a table, right? Those would be examples where someone's temper is not being limited or regulated, would be another way to think of that. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the past progressive. To do this, I start with was or were, whichever form matches my subject, that subject comes next, and then the ing form the verb. Here's my last past progressive example. Were they controlling the airflow in the building? Okay. This is going back to that idea of a mechanical process, right? So whenever we run air conditioning or we run a heater, right, we're controlling the temperature. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about the present perfect progressive. Again, some teachers and some textbooks will call this present perfect continuous. That's fine. They mean exactly the same thing. We use this verb tense to really focus on an action that started in the past and continues into the present. Many times we're focused on how long that action has been ongoing. The reason I like using the name present perfect progressive is you're going to see 3 P's in the name. 1 P for present, 1 P for perfect, and 1 for progressive. This is going to help me remember I need 3 parts to make my verb. 3 P's, 3 parts. Okay? So when I go to make an affirmative sentence, I'm going to have my subject. If the subject is I, you, we, or they, the first part of my verb is have. The second part is going to be the participle been, B-E-E-N, and then I'm going to use the ing form, the verb. Now, if my subject is he, she, or it, the first part of my verb is going to be has, and then the second part, been, and then the ing form, the verb. So we've got to pay attention to our subjects here, but then the order kind of stays the same. Let's take a look at an example sentence. A few large companies have been controlling the American meat and poultry supply chains. Okay? Now, this is an issue that worries some people because they have such significant influence and authority over this, right? Can really affect the prices people get charged, right? Or the quantity that is available for sale because there are so few companies selling different meat or poultry products. Okay? Now, let's take a look at a negative example. To do this, again, I'm going to pay attention to my subject. The first part of my verb is either going to be have not, or the contraction haven't, and the second part will, have not or hasn't, has not. So that's going to be the first part. Then I use been, then the ing form of the verb. Okay, so the only change here in the negative is I'm putting not between have or has and the participle been. Here's another example. She hasn't been controlling her cholesterol. Okay? So again, we're talking about kind of the limit, the level. Here, right, it's not being regulated or it's not being limited. Now, let's talk a little bit about a yes or no question in the present perfect progressive. To do this, I start with have or has. I use my subject, then the participle been, and then the ing form of the verb. Here's my last example. Have they been controlling the dog with the small children around? Okay. So I think this ties back nicely to the second definition of our verb that we discussed earlier about maintaining authority over something. So in addition to children, many people try and control their pets, right? Make sure they're not biting anyone or aggressively, in this case, maybe barking and scaring the children. But really goes back to behaving in a particular way or making sure that something or someone behaves in a particular way. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words and phrases that are related to our verb control. And the first word we're going to talk about today is just the noun form of this word. Same spelling, same pronunciation. Just like our verb control, the noun control can have a number of different meanings. We're just going to talk about 5 of them today. The first way the noun control gets used is to refer to the power to influence or direct certain people's behavior or maybe the way certain events happen. That's what's meant by the course of events. So maybe you're planning an event, right? And you might be asking someone, is this event under your control, right? Are you able to direct and tell people what to do and when to do it? Now, a second way the noun control gets used is to refer to the ability to manage some type of machine, a vehicle, some other object that's able to move. So an example of this might be, she lost control of the car and crashed. Okay? So the sentence is saying she wasn't able to manage the vehicle, right? She wasn't able to influence maybe the direction it was traveling. Now, a third way to use the noun control is to refer to the power to restrain one's emotions. So an example of this might be, get control of your temper, right? So might be another way we're trying to tell someone to calm down and behave in a different way. A fourth way the noun control gets used is to refer to some type of switch or device that regulates a particular machine. So you might hear somebody ask, connected to that earlier example we talked about, where's the volume control? Now, the fifth definition of this noun control is very specific in the study of science. So if you happen to be taking a high school science course or a college science course and you're going to do lab work, you're going to do experiments, you're going to hear this word control used. So a control, again, connected to this very narrow scientific means here, is either a group or some individual that's used as a way for us to compare and check the results of some type of an experiment. So you might hear an experimental group versus a control group, and you're going to see that in my example here. Were there differences between the experimental group and the control? Okay, so here, that's a common question and a common process that happens. So that we understand if the thing we're doing or the modification we're making really has the impact we think it is. Now let's talk about two phrases. We're going to talk first about the phrase in control. Okay? When you hear people use this, they're describing someone or something that is able to direct a particular situation, maybe a person or an activity. An example of this is the teacher in control of his classroom. Okay? For some, the answer will be a very strong, confident yes, right? That person is able to direct and get all the students to do what they want, right? But the answer might be no for some, which connects to our last phrase. It's out of control. So if we're no longer able to manage some situation, a person or activity, or if it's just no longer possible to direct their behavior, you might hear this phrase used. An example of this might be, the fire is burning out of control. So there may be firefighters present and working, and there might be all kinds of tools, but it's still burning, and their efforts are not managing the fire. That's what's meant by out of control in this sentence. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.